Points versus value. Buying by the numbers is the worst way to purchase time on radio. Radio's inherent target ability should prompt agencies to buy audiences, but some agencies just don't take the time to learn the subtle differences. So it's not just necessarily about the ratings and the costs that many agencies are looking for. Many times when you wind up buying on those factors, you may wind up being disappointed because the demographics and the psychographics don't exactly match up with the advertiser. You see that the schedule might not wind up achieving the results that the advertiser would really want, and therefore the advertising winds up becoming ineffective if all you're doing is looking at the number of earlobes that are going to be reached on a particular station. Radio is measured in broad day parts, and time spent listening is vital to radio ratings. The longer the listening time, the higher the share. And radio tends to be measured in two dimensions, measured in terms of cum and an average quarter hour. And these terms should be familiar to you, but just for review's sake, cum is the number of different persons who listen to a station for at least 5 minutes during any time period. This is usually measured over the course of a week, but there could also be daily cum numbers and Monday through Friday cum numbers, monthly cum numbers. So you want to make sure that you understand what period of time the cum number is representing. Average quarter hour, or AQH, is the average number of persons listening to a particular station for at least 5 minutes during a 15-minute period. Those 15-minute periods are going to be actual hard times between top of the hour and 15 past the hour, between 15 past and 30 past, between 30 past and 45 past, 45 and top of the hour. And if a listener is listening for at least 5 minutes within one of those time slots in the hour, they're going to be counted as part of the AQH rating. So what's nice about the AQH number is that it can give you a better sense of how long listeners are actually sticking with the station as a whole, which is another measurement called time spent listening, or TSL. Cost per point, or CPP, buys are dangerous for advertisers because CPP is based on GRP measurements. CPP calculations take into account only two factors: audience size, that's as a whole, and spot rate. Not who is reached and not the value of the audience in terms of potential buying. So again, you're just buying earlobes, and you're trying to get those earlobes for the cheapest rate possible, which may or may not be of best benefit to you as an advertiser. Tazarek promotes an idea called CPI. This is not an official term. This is something that he came up with. CPI standing for cum, profile, and ideas. So we already talked about what cum is. What he means by profile is how the cum fits within the product that is to be advertised. So does the audience that's being reached match up with the audience that the advertiser is trying to reach, and will that product be attractive to those listeners? And then the idea. The idea is what gives the station value beyond its numbers. It's the idea of the salesperson that comes up with the campaign that it presents to the advertiser for investment into the station. CPI, cum, profile, and ideas. Now, let's talk about 7 dirty words. These are not the famous 7 dirty words that George Carlin puts out there, but these are 7 dirty words that no salesperson likes to hear. One of the major objections that may happen: I tried it once, it didn't work. So if you hear "I tried it once, it didn't work," most likely what you are hearing is a state of disappointment. So where does the disappointment come from? Often, it didn't work may translate into, it didn't meet my expectations. So in other words, the problem that the client had did not get solved. Others are the marketing strategy, the competitive environment, the copy concept, the medium chosen to carry the message. All sorts of mistakes may have been made the previous time that they bought radio advertising. So part of your job is to try to troubleshoot, well, what exactly happened and why didn't things work? One more factor, that this was long overlooked in radio before the days of consolidation and trying to meet the needs of the client as opposed to just selling advertising, was scheduling, making sure that the ads that were being aired strategically compared to the programming on the station and the audiences that were available that meet the needs of that client. Two factors for advertising in electronic media are reach and frequency. Reach is the head count of how many people are exposed to a message, so the actual number of earlobes. Frequency is the measure of how many times the average person is exposed to that message. So if you have 50,000 listeners, but they only hear a message once, well, that message could very easily get lost. But if they hear that message several times, there's a better chance that ad is going to more easily be identified and recognized by the listener. In radio, there's a delicate balance between reach and frequency. To get more reach, you may have to sacrifice frequency. By boosting frequency, you lose reach. And a lot of this is going to be the struggle between what day part an ad is running in versus the ratings for that day part versus the number of avails that are going to be made possible within those certain day parts, within those certain programs. Many times there's not going to be as many avails in morning drive, for example, because it is generally the most popular time that people are listening to radio, which means it has the most demand for advertising time to be bought, and it's also going to be more expensive than other times of the broadcast day, where it may be cheaper to run in the midday or in the evening, but you may not have as strong of a reach because there's not as many listeners there. So there is that struggle. Advertising has long believed in the frequency of 3 theory. The frequency of 3 theory is this, that 3 exposures to a message achieves the desired effect. So you need to hear a spot at least 3 times in order for it to actually identify with you in one way or another. Steve Marks and Pierre Bouvard developed this concept called frequency over time. This was their approach to optimum effective scheduling, which we talked about in previous chapters. Frequency over time is how they recommend that a minimum of 3 exposures within a week's time would be the most effective way for a person to hear an advertisement. So it's not just hearing a spot 3 times. They hear it, one particular time, then they don't hear it again for a couple weeks later and whatever. It's not going to resonate with them as well if they would hear that same ad several times within a short period of time. So their theory is you need to hear a spot at least 3 times within a week's time. The number of exposures needed to accomplish that goal is going to be at a different weekly spot level for any given station, day part, audience target, and survey period. So you need to take all those factors into consideration and figure out how many times the spot needs to run on the station in order for that spot to be heard by one particular person at least 3 times within the span of a week. A couple of things to consider. A station with high Q and a low average quarter hour has a high turnover rate. So people are coming in and then tuning out, coming in, tuning out. That's going to be a high turnover rate. Low turnover is a station with low QM, but a high AQH. So there may not be as many unique sets of earlobes, but the earlobes that are there are listening for a longer period of time. So in that case, you would be able to get that frequency over time rather quickly with not near as many airings of your particular spot. So in general, you'd want to use more commercials in a schedule on a station with a high turnover in order for you to be able to get that frequency over time value that you're looking for. On a station that doesn't have as large of a QM but more loyal listeners, you don't need to run your spot as often because you'll hit that frequency over time much quicker. Some of the ways of determining OES, according to Marks and Bovard, are available in a couple of worksheets that are in your textbook, and I would encourage you to take a look at those. Show and tell. By using what radio does best, providing interesting sound, the seller has the opportunity to engage the imagination of the retailer with a commercial for that advertiser's store. This type of commercial is called a spec spot because it is truly speculative. So this would be a full-blown advertisement that's done up for the client. It's not meant for air. It's meant to be a sample spot that a client can listen to that gives them an idea of the capabilities of the radio station and what the spot would sound like if it were to go on the air. Using a spec spot after the needs analysis interview will show the prospect that you've understood what was said. So you've asked the right questions, you've paid attention, you took notes, you took the information that was given to you as you were talking with the client. You wrote up a script, you had it produced, you have something to present to the client. It helps them to see that you were paying attention. It also demonstrates the skills of your station in turning out imaginative copy and effective audio production. So you're kind of showing off here. What can you do? What can your production team do? And that can be a strong selling point for you when you go into your presentation with a good spec spot. Some more things on commercials. Herschel Gordon Lewis says, with radio, words, plus occasional music and sound effects that are both serving as accessories, have to carry the message without assistance. So again, you don't have pictures to help you to be able to convey the message. It all has to be conveyed through sound. So how do you put together a good, effective spot for the client? Lewis offers 8 rules for generating radio messages. Here's his list. Number 1, place the subject before the verb. So write in normal sentence structure that we tend to follow in normal everyday conversation. Short sentences are clearer than 2 sentences tied together. The commercial for radio is not the place for you to wax poetic and to come up with lofty words and long sentences. Keep it short, keep it simple. Use music as a mood setter, not as an end in itself. The music should be able to complement the message that you are trying to portray in the ad. It will help to be able to keep a listener's attention, but you don't want that music overpowering so that the message gets lost. Narration followed by a jingle is clearer than a longer jingle by itself. Jingles can be catchy, but a listener doesn't necessarily want to hear and remember a 30-second or 60-second song about an advertiser. Jingles that are short, that help them to remember the client's name, and spoken word information that talks about the client, what they do, what they offer, is going to be much more powerful and effective. Give ample instructions within the script to the announcer. So when you're writing up copy, if there's certain ways that you want the characterization of the voice actor to read certain things, to have certain emotions, attitudes, different ways to emphasize different words and pausing. Make sure that you include those instructions within the copy. Come to an inflectional stop before starting a new concept. Inflectional doesn't mean temporal. Time is precious, and a long pause lets the listener's interest sag. So you want to make sure that when the announcer reads the copy, that he or she has good sentence structure, that you can tell when he or she comes to the end of a thought, cleanly starts the new thought, so that it's easy for the listener to be able to keep up with the flow of what's happening and what's being said. On the copy, spell out numbers. Don't use numerals. Actually write out the word. 3, T-H-R-E-E. 15, spell out the word 15. Don't let pronunciation and emphasis be left to the announcer's imagination. If there's any question on the pronunciation of a word, you want to add the phonetic spelling of that word, especially for things like proper names, people's names, town names, that sort of thing. Make sure that it's very clear how to pronounce those words. And then there's a 9th rule that is offered here. Don't let the desire to be clever override clarity. Many inexperienced radio writers think of entertainment first and then selling second. So what we're saying here is that it's not necessarily wrong to have a creative spot, but you want to make sure that the substance and the content of the ad is getting through, because that's what the advertiser is ultimately paying for. Roy Williams says, too many ads today are creative without being persuasive. Slick, clever, funny, creative, and different are poor substitutes for informative, believable, memorable, and persuasive. Advertisements are basically short, persuasive speeches. You're trying to get a listener to do some sort of call to action. Make a phone call, visit a website, visit a location. So you want to make sure that you spend that time effectively stating your case to the listener as to why they should pay attention to that business. David Ogilvy says the first thing your radio commercial has to do is to get people to listen. Surprise them, arouse their curiosity, wake them up. Once they're awake, talk to them as one human being to another. Involve them, charm them, make them laugh. So those of you that are in speech class, you'll remember that we talked about this concept of marketing, that the first thing you want to do in a commercial is create an interrupt. You want to grab a listener's attention in such a way that they hear what you're saying, their curiosity gets piqued, and then they stay tuned in for the rest of your message. And so create that interrupt. Get them to tune in and pay attention to what it is you have to say. Then from there, you can engage the listener, you can educate them on the advertiser, and then present the offer with the call to action that you want the listener to follow up on. So those are the notes for Chapter 8. Make sure you take a look at the study questions on Blackboard and be prepared to discuss the questions on Blackboard, discuss your own questions, bring your own comments when we get together to talk about these things in class.